didn't really know.
Yeah. Well, it's didn't have fun.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I wanted to see if I could browse.
Oh, I don't think I need to be frazzled. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, ready?
Yeah. You can do it when there's audience. That's the best place.
In our last.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's good.
Well,
Did she have a good answer?
well, my question is, what?
Yeah.
Mine's very similar. Why did he design it?
Well, no, I would say I wrote a book on that. You should buy it, and then if you don't like the book, buy another copy of it. See if you like that one better. Maybe it's better.
Or maybe I'll write the counter.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what we do. You and I will be getting this back.
All right, one, she's good.
Yeah, she is. I think she's half
Are
already.
you leaving?
What's that? And then she'll fly together to Chicago, and then I stay in Chicago. And then she flies, and then she'll move up.
What time do you say?
Well, I'm one of those. Our flight doesn't usually spend it. And I have TSA flights. That's the bad, and bigger airports are better than small. But if you have two or three flights that are small, and you can back up in that time. So it's like, so it's just odd. So I'm one of those.
Well, watch out for these guys.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. What? You see, you're the one. I showed that to so many people.
Morning, everybody. Morning. You're okay without the microphone? Yeah. Our guest will have the microphone because he's special. And so he will communicate more clearly that way. But I just wanted to take a moment and welcome you. We are excited about what we are doing. And you know what it just sounds like? Pastor Alan, maybe the live stream. You can't hear me very well. It's all right. Yeah, that's probably true. Okay, this is better, I think. Pastor Allen, is this thing on? Sorry, that's a pastor joke. We want to welcome you to this gathering this morning, which is a Vision Day for Fresh Expressions, and welcome those of you in the room, and also welcome those that are on live stream. Thankfully, those in the room didn't know they could be on live stream at home in their pajamas this morning. But we also wanted to record it because we think there are many folks in the congregation that will want to participate, but were maybe not able to join us this morning. So welcome each one of you. So glad to have you with us. And we have been excited at Northsound at looking at innovative ways of doing church. How can we be more effective in reaching our community? And so we have partnered with Fresh Expressions and invited Jim to come. He spoke last Sunday and inspired us with a vision of what Fresh Expressions are. And today, we get to unpack that together. And so if you have questions or comments, you can get those ready because Jim will have an opportunity for you to do that, to ask those. Also, we'll take a break. Jim, I don't know when you want to do that, but whenever Jim says it's break time or when you sort of all leave and break, he'll have to stop. So we'll do that later, but if in the meantime you need to get up for any reason or get more coffee or food, I'm sure Jim wouldn't mind if you slip out to do that. Pastor Finney is our newest staff member, and he has responsibilities for stuff that goes on outside the walls of the church. Now, I realize we're inside the walls of the church, but we're talking about ministry outside the walls of the church. So Pastor Finney is going to come and open our time together in prayer this morning.
Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for bringing us all together this morning. We thank you, we give you glory and honor, Lord. Your mercies are new every morning, Lord. We thank you for the gift of life, for families, friends, safety and protection of our lives, Lord. As we come together this morning, speak to us today, Lord, we pray. Help us renew and stir in us the purpose for which you have called the church. Over the period of time, things have gone a little cold and things have changed, Lord. But you're an unchanging God, your purpose is unchanging, and the plan of salvation is eternal for all mankind, Lord. So help us as we sit together today, hear from our speaker, Lord. Stir our hearts, Lord, for your kingdom. Anoint our speaker. Bless the hearts of everyone who is here today, hearing your word. We give you glory and honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
So last Sunday, I introduced our guest, Jim Pace. For those of you that weren't here, Jim is from Blacksburg, Virginia, and we have been a part of a cohort with Jim going back to February, where we have been looking together at what it might look like to have fresh expressions of church in our community here. And as we were going through that, we thought, you know what, it would be great to have a day when Jim can come and share a vision for what that will look like. So would you join me in welcoming Jim Pace to Northside?
Thanks, Barry. I have to say, my wife and I flew out here last Saturday, and the plan wasn't to speak on one weekend and then do this on the next. It is the grace of North Sound and the leaders that let us do that. We had this plan to where I would be speaking, I think, this Sunday? Yeah, I'd be speaking tomorrow, and then we would have this right after that. On Sunday. And then I had I'm in a doctoral program, and my class, because of COVID, got shifted, and it threw a wrench in that. So we've been able to be out here all week. We got to enjoy John and Jean's place down in Olympia, and that is amazing. This the Pacific Northwest. I've only been out here a couple of times. It's fantastic out here. Oh my gosh. Our daughter, we sent her pictures of just what we're seeing out here, and she's a senior at Virginia Tech back in Blacksburg, and if she comes out here, I don't think we're getting her back. So I don't know how much we're going to encourage that, because we like to have her around, but it's beautiful out here, and you guys have been so gracious, so thank you. I'm grateful for you spending 3 hours on a Saturday too. Now, this is normally, you should know, this is Barry working on your behalf. This is normally a 6 or 7 hour thing that we do. We reduced it to 3. So what we're going to, I got some, thank you, got some amens. Everybody's like, yeah, go Barry. And so what we'll be doing, we're going to kind of feel our way through it a little bit. I've cut a bunch of stuff. We're trying to get down to what is most important for you guys. And then so as we go, I'm just going to keep an eye on the time, and if we get way out or weird or something like that, we'll just adjust. And we have a history of what it's done for us, and all of that is good. None of that is wrong. But Lord, sometimes what we can do is we can allow what it's done for us and what we believe it can do to let us grip a little bit tightly what you might be calling us to do. So today, Spirit, we just ask you to help us to open up our hands a little bit and see if there's anything to this. And if there is, give us the strength and courage to go for it. Please. Amen. All right. Well, you can hit the next slide. We wanted to start with something that happened with Jesus, and I think it's pretty telling in Matthew 9, 35 through 38. It says, then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. So this is relatively early in Jesus' ministry. Okay, it's a little hard to tell when we read Matthew exactly the chronology, because Matthew, like most Jewish and even Near Eastern biographers, would take the events in Jesus' life and rearrange them. That was completely acceptable biography back in his day. And the reason he was doing it is they had a belief that it wasn't just that you would understand the order that things happened, but what was God trying to do in the midst of all the things that happened. They would say that our fixation on strict chronology, we miss a whole lot of stuff. So they would reorder it. So Matthew would reorder things, but we do know this was pretty early. And so Jesus went about in all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every sickness. And then it goes on. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion. You can go to the next slide. There we go. Thank you. He had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless. That's a typo. I've been telling them to fix that for 6 months. Harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Now, the question, what sticks out in that to you? Is there anything that jumps out? The harvest is plentiful, yes. But the laborers are not as plentiful. That seems to be the thing that we run into when we're trying to get volunteers for things. And when Jesus is talking about the harvest and the laborers, he's not just talking about volunteers to run stuff. That is a part of it. But it doesn't seem like that just started with us, right? It seems like this has been an ongoing thing, that it's tough. Very good. So the harvest is plentiful. The laborers are less so. What else?
Ask the Lord of the harvest
Mm-hmm.
to send out laborers.
Right. Ask him. Ask him. Very good. Anybody else? Anything else you notice?
It says harvest.
It says it specifically uses the term harvest. That's meaningful.
It is harvest.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. This is extremely common for Jesus. He was talking to a primarily agricultural people. And so he was speaking in terms they understood. They understood that if you do the right things with the planting, then the harvest will come. And there's a whole lot of stuff in there. If we have time to go into that we'll see if we have time. My hunch is we won't. Anybody else? I think I heard somebody else over here.
Without a shepherd.
Compassion, yes. He had compassion. He saw their need. And that goes into the sheep without a shepherd. Somebody over there? There we go. So yes, he saw their need and he changed. I think what we cannot lose in this is that Jesus, by the time he's saying this, he has already demonstrated. In fact, in Philippians 2, we say that your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, even though he was in the very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be held on to. But he took the nature of a servant. By the time Jesus got here to say this, he had already demonstrated a care for us that none of us can even approach towards each other. He had simply stepped out of the perfect community he had with the Father and the Spirit and came and lived among us. And like I said last Sunday, he didn't hover a foot off the ground and stay fully God and just be around and be visible. He became us. He was hungry. He was angry. He hurt. When he went on the cross, it would have been excruciating. He did all of it. All he asks of us is that the stuff that you've seen me do, just do that stuff. We can complicate it. I teach in a seminary. I'm in a doctoral program. I'm a consultant for churches. We can complicate things really easily. And we need to think about things at deep levels. There's a real value. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't. But at its base, he's saying, this thing that I did, do it. And trust that the strength through the Spirit that I give you will be enough. The only miracle other than the resurrection that is not, or that is in every single one of the Gospels, and the miraculous birth, even though you could argue Matthew. Anyway, it doesn't matter. There's only one miracle that's in every single Gospel. Do you know what miracle that is? It's where Jesus fed the 5,000 men. That's the only one where they were out there and they were hungry, and the disciples said, let's let them go so that they can go get food. He's like, you feed them. The disciples are like, we don't have any money for that. And he picks up some bread and some fish, holds it up to God. He starts handing it out. And there was extra left over. It's the only miracle that got in every single one. And there are all kinds of really deeply theological reasons for that. I've written papers and I've read books on it. But I think there's another reason that's actually fairly low to the ground that explains it. I don't think that the Spirit wanted there to be a chance that you would get through a gospel and not see what Jesus did there. Because what Jesus did there, quite simply, is he took what was not enough and he made it enough. That's what he did. Whether he is going back, as Matthew would say, and demonstrating the wilderness feeding like in Exodus, and we can have all kinds of things. I think at a very base level, the Spirit wanted you to see that when we take what is not enough and we trust God, somehow he makes it enough. And if we can just hold on to that Jesus calls us to be like him, says, go do what I did, and I'll give you the strength. And if we hold on to the fact that he takes what is not enough and he makes it enough, then we're fine. The problem is, with usually one or both of those things, we struggle. All right? So what if, the next slide, what if we saw people with the same compassion that Jesus has? The people that are out there. Your friends, not strangers. Fresh Expressions is not about door knocking, okay? That doesn't go well in Virginia. I have to believe it wouldn't go over super well in Washington. I have to believe. We are not the buckle of the Bible Belt, but we're one of the holes on the belt, all right? We are right there. We are right down the road from Lexington, Jerry Falwell, and we'll just not even, go into that. But the fact is that we are in a very, very biblically conservative area. It doesn't work where we are. So we're not suggesting it. What if we saw people with the same compassion that Jesus has? And what if we saw this as a time of opportunity rather than a time of scarcity? The church, and I can say this globally and nationally, statistically, is in a state of panic because our numbers are down, way down. Now, I'm not even talking COVID. COVID made every organization smaller. Church is no different. Every single organization is smaller than it was. Well, okay, I'm almost. But that's not because the church is suddenly not good. It's because people are holding back. And that's going to be that way for, I think, a while. But beyond COVID, the church's numbers are not good. That's part of the reason that I think that what you all are doing, the questions that you're asking, is impressive to me because you're asking them before you're in trouble. That's usually when churches start asking these kind of, well, what do we do? It's when it's very clear that what they're doing doesn't work. And usually when they notice that is not just when their giving is down, but when they can no longer meet budget anymore and they're not even close to it. That's usually when churches start asking the question. You guys aren't doing that. You're asking it before. That's smart. So what if we saw this as a time of opportunity rather than a time of scarcity? That it's not that church can't work anymore. It's not that these people are so terribly depraved out in the market and on down that nothing will work. It's just the stuff that we've done for a long time that has really served us very well for a long time. Maybe some of it needs to change. Not all of it, but some of it. Now, I want to show you a video, and this is from Chris Backert. He's the director of Fresh Expressions US. He's also one of my former co-pastors, my dearest friend in the world, and he's going to kind of give you a little overview of Fresh Expressions. So if you can go to the next slide, and then you remember how to... There it is.
One of the exciting things about Fresh Expressions and what's taking place in the movement here in the U.S. is when the everyday people of God are really coming to grasp the mission opportunities that are in front of them, whether it be in their local neighborhood or sort of their network, or where they work out, or where they go to work. And really, as they begin to step into that, see the creative possibilities there are to see the gospel take root and new communities of faith grow up right from those things. And the expressions are varied and unique and different and really reaching new universe of people. What really has been inspiring, though, is to see how pastors of existing congregations have been able to catch a vision for this and see not just how significant it is for the work of the kingdom, but how much it can be involved in the renewal and the revitalization of their own congregations. And so in a moment, you're going to see quite a number of different stories of people from all across the country doing new and creative communities of faith, fresh expressions of church that are really reaching people beyond the reach of the church today.
The church gathers a couple times a month and we bring food to share. That's our offering. And we gather around the Lord's table where we hear God's word, God speaks to us, and we share the Lord's Supper together.
Releasing means giving permission. When you release people into mission, they're not here at prayer meeting every Wednesday night. They're not always even here on Sunday morning, but they are doing ministry.
We laugh with our customers, we cry with them when they come in and they're sad. You know, we learn what's going on with their families.
We go to weddings, we go to funerals. We like to believe that we serve food, but we also serve a spiritual need within the community.
What we realize is that people are lonely. They want family.
Just enjoy Tuesdays, coming and cooking for everybody. And not only just filling out their stomachs, but filling out their hearts and souls with the heart of God.
We don't have some grand master plan except to pay attention to what our community is and seek to create the elements that we believe are transforming.
We made a commitment as a group of ladies to be present there at Wendy's, to be so alive, to come to know the felt need of that population in that community, and to hear their stories, and then respond the way the Spirit dictates in that moment.
But then we become, all these all people all say, to say something. Waiting for people to come to church so that we can share the gospel with them. Because then we will have it. We have to do better off.
Christ is not a stationary God, right? He is out in front of us. He's already 5 miles down the road, right? It's up to us to follow.
Thank you. That's, I don't know if you caught that quote one of the pastors shared. He said, waiting for people to come to church to share the gospel with them won't work anymore. They're not going to come. Even sometimes that, I get a little choked up about that. When I want to share something about myself, and I hope it comes off the right way. If it doesn't, well, then there we go. We'll start off poorly, and that's not atypical for me. So when I stepped out of pastoring, which I just stepped out of in May, and I'd been pastoring at the same church for 25 years. We'd sent off 7 church plants. We started other congregations. We'd incubated others. And when it became clear that the Spirit was calling me to help other churches, to do consulting, There were a number of places that reached out to me that were very kind and gracious with offering if I wanted to work with them. And a lot of these church consulting companies do amazing things, but they are incredibly expensive. To sign a contract with some of them is $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. And our church is we say we have the problems of a big church and the budget of a small one. We had probably 80% college students at Virginia Tech that went to our church. So 80% of our church were college students. So we had a really small, there were a lot of years where our budget was that. And the reason that even though those groups are doing great things, and churches that can pay that need help too, and that's fine. But if a church can pay that, there's all kinds of options. The reason that I have gotten involved with Fresh Expressions, and the reason that I do the type of consulting that I do, is because I'm drawn to the ones that either don't have that money or in some cases don't even realize that they need the help. And this, what we're talking about this morning, if you could do one thing, maybe a couple of things, this can work. If you can just release what you think is required for church to be church. Now, we're not releasing the whole thing. We're not saying that church is nothing anymore and let's just do whatever we want. The Scripture gives us a lot of direction. What it doesn't do is say exactly how you have to do those things. If you can release that, then what could start to happen is we could start to imagine some new ways that we could do things. And then as they get a little more feet to them, you'll realize they're not really new ways. These were things they were doing in the first century. We're not that creative. We're just going back and remembering, oh, okay. But the reason that I want to work with Fresh Expressions instead of some of these other things is because I have seen for 15 years I've been studying the way that churches work, function, strategy, structure, modeling, change modeling, all of this stuff. There's a whole lot of things that can work if there's a singular correct person doing it. And almost can't without them. And I've seen churches go that way, and then that person leaves, and they fail. This isn't that. This is low to the ground. This is low-key and easy. G.K. Chesterton had a famous quote. He said, "The church is a place where we should allow good things to run wild." Now, I will tell you, we've been doing this stuff for the last 10 years. And sometimes we capitalize the W in wild, and that's not always fun. There's some insane stuff that's going on. This is not unproblematic. And it took us probably 3 years of feeling like we were pushing a big rock up a steep hill to figure out how we do this. We're not going to give you a way that North Sound does it exactly step by step by step. What we're going to do is we're going to lay out, here's some things you can, here's some ways you can, and here's some people that can help along the way as you're doing it. That's the reason I'm doing this, because this can work. Culture has changed, and we're going to get into that. If you can go to the next slide. And then the next one, please. We are in an unprecedented moment because of COVID. How many of us instantly, better pastors, became televangelists? I mean, how many of us were like, okay, so suddenly that's the camera that's streaming, that's the one that's this, that's the, this where you can walk. I have had a bald head for a long time. There's never been so much concern about the reflection off my bald head, if I stand outside here or outside here. It's an unprecedented moment. Churches could not meet as the church. And we kind of put a whole lot of our eggs in the basket of being together, right? How many churches, their slogan is, yeah, we're nice, but we don't care if we see you. That's like a really, really bad church slogan, but that's kind of, we had to separate. And go to the next slide. It's made people desperate, and desperation can do one of two things. It can cause you to cower, or it can cause you to think differently. It can cause you to ask the question, has COVID and our culture just bested God? We are just too complicated for God to work out. Or is all he's saying to do is do what I've called you to do. Love them, trust me, believe in my power, and let's look at what's going on and let's make this a seedbed for innovation. Let's get creative. And churches have done it. And we can still do it. How many of you have seen pictures like this on the next slide? I mean, beautiful, beautiful churches that are empty. I was in Pennsylvania a week ago, and we were just right in Harrisburg, right at the Capitol, and there were all these massive churches, 150-year-old churches, and they are gorgeous inside. And I would ask, well, how many people typically come on a Sunday? And the guy that I was working with, he's like, well, 10. 12. 2 of them are closing. And that's fine. And that's not always the case. There are some beautiful churches that are full and the Spirit is moving, and we're not trying to exaggerate, but we know what's going on. And it's not that people don't care about people. They're just not looking. If you go to the next slide, they're not looking to the church anymore to provide some of those things. They still get together, just not in those places. The next slide. It's from Peter Drucker. And he said this back in 92. There are a couple times that there's some things that Peter Drucker says that I disagree with, which is probably true of every author. But sometimes he says stuff and it's like, oh, that's on it. Every few hundred years throughout Western history, a sharp transformation has occurred. In a matter of decades, society altogether rearranges itself. Its worldview, its basic values, its social and political structures, its arts, its key institutions. Think about the difference in the United States from 1945 and 1965. It happens. 50 years ago, a new world exists. Or 50 years later, a new world exists. And the people born into that world cannot even imagine the world in which their grandparents lived and into which their own parents were born. Our age is such a period of transformation. And what a lot of social theorists are saying is that change is now happening, that orbit of change is happening a little quicker. And so we have more people that are looking. And how many of us have looked at what our kids are, to get our kids to use their cell phone to make a call to us is just unthinkable to them. They'll FaceTime us, they'll text, they'll whatever. But can you just use we call it a phone. Can you just make it, oh, that's Dad. Are you kidding? And that's just on a small scale. We look at it with our parents. I'm at the age where I have become the IT support for my parents. And that is a dark hole you jump into if you're really trying to help your parents figure something out. But we're going to be the same way. I mean, it's just the way it works. Our age is a period of transition and transformation. And so it begs the question, what needs to stay the same? Because some things do. Some people say, when you have a big period of change, everything's on the table. Let's reinvent it all. No. But some people say, because of their concern about the transition, we better lock into what we really hold on to and protect it. No. What we do is we lay it at the feet of the cross and we ask the Spirit, what are you telling us to do right now? And you might have to speak a little bit louder because we're more confused and nervous than we were 5 years ago. Next slide. What if this is the moment the church can recognize the rightness for spiritual seeking, see the mission opportunities everywhere, return to the Acts church, and not just do it exactly what they did, but do what they did in our day. Take risks. How many people that think a part of my discipleship of Jesus, a part of my following Jesus is I need to constantly be taking risks, versus how much of our time is spent protecting ourselves from risk? Just obey the Holy Spirit. There's a question on the next slide that you can show. Who are our churches not serving? Who are the people that, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes, that are not going to come regardless of how good you do what you do? And I was here on Sunday. You guys do that very well. I think the preacher was a little, he could have raised his game a little bit, but everything else was great. You can do everything with the highest amount of excellence that is possible. And you're still going to reach fewer and fewer people. Not because you're not good at this, but because they're not looking for it anymore. That's not fear-mongering. That's social statistics. That's demographic information. That's just asking people, what do you think? Let's look at that a little bit. The nuns, the next slide, please, are 23% of the population and growing. Is everybody familiar with the nuns? Anybody want to toss out, what are the nuns?
Not religious, done in the church.
What's that?
Done in church, not religious.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's the nuns and the duns.
Yeah.
The nuns are the ones that would say that they don't have any real religious affiliation. They're not really interested. I was listening to a podcast, and Jason Bateman was on it. And I'm a child of the 80s, and I remember, Silver Spoons, and I remember, all these shows. And he's just interesting. And he just said, in saying stuff, he was asking somebody some spiritual question, and they just wrecked it. I mean, it was terrible, because they didn't know anything either. But he's like, I just never really followed any of that. That kind of thought, I just never really followed any of that. The duns are the ones that have had church experience, and they're done with it. It's burned them enough. Now, we have those, like I said, in Virginia. I have to believe you got one or two up here in Washington State. And now what we're seeing is COVID has caused a new category. And there's not real good agreement on what to call it yet. These are people that are not done. They're not none. They would say, no, I'm Christian. I've enjoyed my connection to the church, but for a year I couldn't do it, and I kind of like my life a little bit more like it is now. I might listen every now and then, but in terms of being a meaningful part of the community, honestly, Sundays can be a little crazy. And I remember, we had kids. Your kid signs up for a travel sport, that's it. Your weekends are done. Right? Nuns are 23%, just them alone. The next slide. The Pew Research Center predicts that 52 million new individuals will be added to the number of religiously unaffiliated by 2050. We'll get 52 million more people. That's because people are going to be stepping out of it, and that's because more and more people that are growing up, that are our kids' age or our grandkids' age, are just going to be like, it feels kind of old-fashioned. Talking about church to people is a bit like talking about CrossFit to people. There are people that are excited, and ain't nobody else excited about it. All right? It's it's becoming more and more like someone that is really focused on sewing their own clothes or churning their own butter or something like that. It's like they're just into it and they want to tell people. And you're like, great. And maybe even you'll have some of their butter. You might come to a service with them. But you could say, that's great. You're really into that. I don't see any need in my life for it whatsoever. I can buy butter at the store and it's fine. You are not telling me about something that meets a need that I even think that I have. So when we invite them, some will come. More and more won't. Unless we do a couple things differently. Now let's get back into the dirty facts. In fact, Barry, you mentioned good to great, which he talks about. You've got to look at the brutal facts. Let's keep looking at the brutal facts. That number increases to 48% for Americans under 30. 48% of Americans under 30 will be religiously unaffiliated by 2050. That's the trajectory. 1/3 of millennials are not affiliated with any faith. I'm in a college town. Blacksburg, Virginia is a college town. And I can tell you, our numbers are higher than that. That's the statistical average. And I think our area follows yours a little bit closer in this because of the people that we get. Between the years of 2007 and 2014, thank you, the adult population grew by 18 million people in the United States. Between 2007 and 2014, the adult population grew by 18 million people, but the share of adults who identify as Christian declined by 7%. Now, we're not trying, again, this is not fear-mongering. These are facts. This is what we're looking at. We can say, well, shame on them. Or we can do what we are every day, hopefully, desperately grateful that Jesus did for us, and he came to us. And he showed us something that we did not even see that we needed. And those of us that are followers of Jesus, which I'd imagine to be a real high percentage in this room, are not impressive people, but we at least saw the reality of what he was offering and we jumped at it. Next slide. It's about real people. People you know, people that I know. These are 4 kids that go to our church. What they're coming into, our kids our youngest is 21, our oldest is 24. We got a 22-year-old in the middle there. And the world that they are in is not the world I grew up in. We need to change for them so that this thing doesn't become more outdated. But in the midst of that, the next slide, please, the harvest is ripe. We believe because of the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, what Jesus said still applies. This ain't just a great book. It's an inspired one, and it's still true. About a quarter of U.S. adults, 27%, now say that they think of themselves as spiritual but not religious. That's up 8 percentage points in 5 years. But look at this. Let's take a second. This is a bit like in the Old Testament, when the prophets would just be speaking doom and gloom. Every now and then it'd be like, okay, hang on a second. Here's some good news. All right, and then back to the doom and gloom, and then, okay, here's some good news. That's a little bit of what this is. I want to show you what, at the next slide, what Fresh Expressions in the UK, Fresh Expressions got its start in Europe. When I started paying attention to it was because I saw that it was effective in Europe. In Europe, when you look at spiritual trajectories, they're about 10, 15 years ahead of us, right? So they're more depraved than we are. But it worked there. If it works there, wow, that's something. 2,100 Fresh Expressions of church are in the Church of England. Now, when you think of innovation and doing things new, does the Church of England leap to your mind? No. They're pretty big on tradition. And they haven't stopped being big on tradition. But they started trying some stuff. And it worked. It had 94,000 participants in those 2,100 Fresh Expressions of the church. How about you think of the Methodist Church. In their name is method. They started trying it too in the UK. 1,077 Fresh Expressions of church in the Methodist Church UK, with 38,769 participants, of whom 24,424 had no recent involvement with any church community. This isn't just sheep shifting. That's what we call it in the pastoral biz, where they stop going to this church and they start going to this one. Look at us, we're reaching more people. No, you're not. You're doing the same thing better, and people are coming. This is new people. That's kind of cool. Now let's look at a couple more, and then, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to give a couple of breaks. We'll kind of keep them short, and I'd ask if you just come on back, because again, we're dealing with trying to keep this time short, but getting you through everything. Okay, a couple more slides, and we'll do that. So let's look at current attitudes towards church in the U.S. All right? Probably you've seen a lot of these. In that first bubble, 20% attend church regularly. If you go right over to the right, I love this. 20% don't attend church, but say they do. They would say, this is my church, but they don't come. I mean, they're the creasers. You've heard of those, like Christmas and Easter, those kind of folks. Yeah, but it's like so you got those 20. On the bottom bubble, 20% say they would attend church if invited by a friend. And regardless of the way culture has shifted, that number has held pretty steady the last 100 years. That number isn't shifting. But then there's 40% who have no interest in church and will not walk into one on a Sunday morning. Those are the people that it does not matter how good you are, how nice you are, they're not coming because it's a church. Either because they feel like that's irrelevant and a waste of their time, or they have been burned in buildings like these before, and they're not looking for that to happen again. 40%. The next slide. What if we took seriously that 40%? Typically, in church growth modeling, those are just cast-offs. We can't do anything with them. But what if we aimed at them? That seems like kind of what Jesus did. He didn't seem to go to the ones that would be the obvious choices. If Jesus was being the Messiah the way that we think he should have gone straight to Rome, converted Caesar, all that. He should have gone to the powerful, and he didn't. In fact, he seemed to steer clear of them and go to the people that were the farthest away. What if not we take the entire focus of the church in that direction, but what if we try some stuff with those people? What if we took seriously that 40%? And then we included people who are open but not currently connected to church, that other 20%. That's 60% of people. That's over half the people that we are around. Next slide. That's a great opportunity. That's a great opportunity. The last thing I want to get into is the discussion of first, second, and third spaces. Is anybody familiar with that terminology? Some people are. But someone that's familiar with that idea, what is a first space? Right, it's your home, right. It's where you spend the bulk of your time. Now, what they're seeing is there's a shift. The newer first space is becoming work. Now, so it's going back and forth because people are spending more time at work than with family. Okay? So the second space, it's, home. Usually the second is work, but that's inverting. And then what is the third space?
Gathering place.
What's that? A gathering place.
Coffee shop.
Right. A place that you typically go. It could be the gym. It could be a park where you walk. It could be, for us, a third space when we were playing around with some of these ideas and I was just kind of experimenting, was our kids, the parents of our kids' travel soccer team. Seth's travel soccer team parents. That was a third space for us because we were always with them. So it's a place you typically are if you're not one of those two places. So I want to ask you, the next slide, what is your third space? What is your third space? And what we're going to do over the course of the morning is we are going to, I'd just like you to think about if you were going to start one of these fresh expressions, if we can even understand what that is, which we'll get to that, I promise you. What would it look like? And that is not because everyone in here is going to start one. Not everyone in here is going to be led necessarily to start one. That's fine. There's not like God's A team and then his B team. The A team are the ones that are going, no. God calls us to be engaged in the inherited, established church. This thing right here does an awful lot of good for an awful lot of people. And there need to be people that are committed to this. There needs to be. It's not a win if everybody starts something and nobody comes on Sunday here. It is not a win. Some of you are going to be led to that. There'll be some of you that are going to be led to start some of these other things. But regardless of where you're being led, if you can think about it like, how would I do it if I was going to do it? It's just going to trigger some different thinking in your brain. So I'd like to do that, knowing that not everybody is going to be led to do that. This is, again, we're not There's not a hierarchy of spiritual value going on here. So I'd like you to think, what is your third space? Maybe a couple people could toss out if you have an idea.
Studio.
What's that?
Yoga studio.
Yoga studio. There you go. Yoga makes me feel very, very, very bad about my flexibility. I feel like I'm going to snap in half when I go.
The local coffee shop, like encountering the baristas.
Yes.
The yoga game.
Yes, the local coffee shop. Absolutely. Where else?
Parks.
Mm-hmm. Parks. For me, it's the gym. There's a certain time I go every day, and there are people that are there with me. The people that go before work are like militant about not missing that time, and you develop a community. I just want you to think about what your third space is. If you go out and there's a restaurant, you go once a week. There's just something that it's a part of your normal week that you're there. Okay? And then if you were starting a fresh expression, you can go to the next one. If you were starting a fresh expression, do you think it would be in a first, second, or third space?
Yes.
Yeah, right. It could be in any of them. Exactly. So it could be in your first space. That could be something in your neighborhood. A lot of what's come out of COVID that's been good is people have rediscovered their neighborhood. They have friends that live around them. And so you could start something in your neighborhood. It could be at work. You could start something, there are people at work that you just naturally kind of cluster up with and hang out with, or that you care about. You know their needs because you spend a lot of time around them. You know them. Or it could be one of these third spaces. The question would be for you, if you were going to start one of these, where do you think it would start? Would it be around your home, in your neighborhood? Would it be at your work? Or would it be in a third space? Just give your brain 30 seconds to think about that and think about it. The next slide, please. In smaller micro communities, these smaller groups, one of the values of it, the reason that they can be good is that they can be built around affinity. And you're going to hear examples from people as we go through the rest of the morning. There are things you already like to do. You know, one of the things that we did, and we were doing this before we had Fresh Expressions language, but this is the very stuff we were doing, is we were talking to our leaders about what would you like, what do you enjoy doing, and you would do it more if you really had the chance. Because you probably have friends that like doing similar things. What could you invite them into? And then how can we, over time, bring pieces of church into that? You can know and be known. One of the things that's true out of COVID is people are more concerned about being in large groups, or at least the percentage of people that are concerned about being in large groups is up. But they want to be around people. So smaller groups, smaller clusters, their value in people's lives are shooting through the absolute roof right now. They're nimble. They can shift. They can adjust. They need limited resources. Doesn't take a lot. In a lot of cases, it doesn't take anything. Just thinking, but it doesn't take money. And they're scalable. You could start one, and then others can form. Okay? The next slide. So you're doing that with people who are interested in pursuing meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose. And this next two slides are so important. The first one, not as a competition with existing churches. If you get Fresh Expressions going, here's what it's going to mean. The reality is, and I can tell you because we have it in our church. Some people that normally come on your Sunday, to your Sunday services, they won't always be able to be there because they're out doing the thing that they're doing. And it doesn't mean that the goal of a Fresh Expression is not to, okay, we'll hang out there for a while, eventually to get them back here. You'll start to see that a lot of those folks will kind of start to come in to the inherited church. But the goal, it's not just a long way around getting more people. It's about reaching more people. That's what happens. But it's not as a competition with his existing churches. It's not, that's why we say, and part of the reason that this can work is because it values both things the same. We talk about the fresh expression part of it because the inherited church, the existing church, we got that down. We got it locked. We understand it. So we need to be pushed this way a little bit. But it's not at the risk of this. It's not as a competition, but the next slide, but as a complement. To connect with those the existing church is not likely to reach. Again, it doesn't matter how good you are at what you're doing. There are some people that will never give you a chance. They just won't. Should they? Sure. You guys are delightful. But they're not. So we can get mad at them for not being fair. Or we can praise God that Jesus didn't do that with us. And start doing what he did. Fresh Expressions, the next slide, is about taking the church Jesus loves closer to the people Jesus loves. Doing it a little differently, failing. If you do this, there's going to be so many mistakes you're going to make. I mean, it's truly. We go back and we talk about some of the things we did early on, and it's like, this is just ridiculous, God. But we learn. We learn. It's not quick. Those of you that are going to stay with the inherited, established church, you become so important then. Because there are going to be people that are going to hear about these things, and they'll be like, oh, it's just a new fad and all that. This is not fad. It's been around a long time. Again, it goes back to the first century. That's a pretty decent run, I would argue. But when things don't work the way that people feel like they should, and probably when they don't work the way that they should, there are going to be some people that are going to be like, see, that doesn't work. We should just do this. And then those of you that are still with the inherited church, your value and the need for you stepping up and saying, no, that is not how we're doing this. That is not how we're handling this. Yeah, that didn't go very well. But it can. And we're going for it because we believe it could. When my daughter was learning how to drive, she learned how to drive, and then she worked, and you know, we said, if you save half, we'll match and we'll get you a car. What she wanted was this red Jetta that was a stick, and it was a good car, but it was red. It's so nice, Dad. It's a stick. So I know how to drive a stick. So I was like, okay, I'll teach you how to drive a stick. And that girl about took my head off my shoulders. With the clutch. I thought I was going to need advanced chiropractic. But I told her she would get frustrated when she would stall. How many of you drive stick? How many of you have never stalled? Yeah, that's right. I told her, I said, you're about 100 bad stalls away from figuring this thing out and being fine. So let's stall it a bunch and figure it out. And what that did for her is it turned a failure into something that's actually moving forward. You will have to have that. And those of you that are with the inherited church, you are going to have to reframe that because there's going to be plenty of stalls. If people want to look for those as a sign this doesn't work, they're not going to look hard. You will be the voices that will matter then. We'll talk about that later. Okay, all right. Look, I got it. Yeah, we got to move. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, 6 minutes. I'm in a benevolent mood. Let's go to 10:10, and can everybody just please be back by 10:10? And if if there's a line, and then please stay in the line, that's fine. But we'll try to get going again at 10:10. Thanks. Okay. Yep, I'm on. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I coming through? Yeah, I don't think I am. Thank you. I will. Thank you. That's great. Great. Okay. Thank you. There, yeah, that's good. All right. Hey, I'm not on. What's that? You can hear me through the thing? Okay. Okay. Well, then maybe I am. Can people hear me through? Okay, there we go. All right. The only thing better than my voice is my voice louder, huh? One time it was just a stupid joke, but I go to a lot of places, and we were doing a sound check, and I said, can you just please, on the board, does your board have a button for that would make me sound extra profound and wise? I would like you to push that button, please. And the guy was like, I don't even know where the wise button is. I'm like, okay, all right, I want to do that. All right, can we advance? Let's see, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Okay. So what I'd like to do, and in a few minutes I'm going to give a break for questions, and then we'll also have questions at the end. If you have any questions along the way, you can always just throw your hand up and say, well, okay, what's going on there? And we can talk about it as well. It's just we're trying to balance getting through everything and making sure that it's not just a verbal blast, which nobody enjoys. All right, so what I want you to do is there's a video of a church that's Wildwood United Methodist Church. This friend of mine, Michael Beck, is the pastor there. And I want you to look at what they're doing, and then I want you to pay attention when they show video of the church itself. Because you see what they're doing, and then you see the video of the church itself, and you might be surprised. So let's go ahead and play that video, please.
We're here in Wildwood, Florida, and I'm about to introduce you to the world that is my parish. Freedom in Bible is a church that happens in the most southwest grill. At Tree Parlor. The church happening at Tree Parlor.
Church 3.1 gives people a chance to get out, get fit about Jesus, yoga therapy church. Mind, body, and soul meeting together. People in the community bring their dogs here. We're having church here today. Here love is a fresh expression. I bring my scissors, my blow dryer, and try to let them know that they are loved by God. Basically, they came out of getting relationships with people that are already there in the heart.
This is all one church.
And then you have
All these fresh expressions are connected to this church.
When we have the taste of grace, the community come together to eat. I took the door off my office off the hinges and I put that in the sanctuary. Just let the congregation know that I was not going to be in that office. And this guy, John Rowe, he said this thing like, the world is my parish. So I let them know that I would be doing that. But I would go out in the community, and that would be my office, connecting with people, being in the spaces, building relationships.
To be honest, when we first started talking about fresh expressions, we were very skeptical and felt he was ignoring the needs of the older parishioners who, because of their loyalty to the church, they deserved his time and attention. And, you know, at a certain point, it was very interesting to watch as the Holy Spirit kind of took over.
My goal is to navigate the two worlds of taking care of the folks, the saints who are holding the church together, and at the same time, do things in the community. We got some folks willing that experienced a vision day and taught kind of a vision to this. We brought them to a pioneer learning community. So they got actually immersive training in these concepts and do's and don'ts. So then we just started to encourage people to find like your passion, your hobby. Let's start talking about that, how it can be a fresh expression. And one after another, throughout our community. We would call them fresh expressions. But we also have to take care of the inherited, what I like to call the tree. So there's that inherited tree that's been there for a long time and has lived through the desert of decline and post-Christendom. So when we're grafted together in this way, we're seeing new kind of vineyard emerge. And our church is no longer really defined about just the rootstock, just the tree, but now people in our community experience us in all these different ways. Like there's that church over there in the tattoo parlor, and there's the one in the Mexican restaurant. They do that thing in the park.
Our church is growing, and a lot of the growth is coming from people accepting Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
I was at a point in my life where I would have probably not stepped foot back into church because I had been through so much. But then I went to a church from something like this, and that's where I guess I already fell in love with God. And here I am, like a year later, and I'm like about to start my own.
So I think in a smaller church that we sometimes look at our barriers rather than our assets. So we have to get permission to fail forward. It's okay to throw a lot of noodles at the wall and see what sticks, what comes out of it.
Wildwood is a normal church. We do all those things every week that most churches do. We have Bible studies. We have celebrate every programs. But then every week at Wildwood, there's some not so normal things happening in the sense of traditional church, as most of us have experienced it. And almost every day, there's some fresh expression meeting in some location throughout the community. And so those things are happening, coexisting beside all the normal traditional things that are happening in the church, and giving life to each other. So those traditional forms are sending people out into the fresh expressions. The fresh expressions are sending people who matriculate back to the church. And there's an exchange that's going on there that's life-giving. And that, I think, is probably the most powerful thing about fresh expressions in an inherited mixed economy way, is you release the mission force that's sitting in your pews every Sunday.
So when you see all the things that they're doing, and then they show you the video of their church, is that what you expected? You know, what you think if they're doing all this stuff, they must have hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe a couple thousand people. Then it's easy to imagine. No, they're just a normal church. They just have caught a vision for something that is a part of how they express church. All right? Now, there's something called, that Michael referenced, called a blended ecology. And if you could go to, there we go. And that's a term that if you use Fresh Expressions lingo, or if you choose to walk with Fresh Expressions through some of these trainings. Like I've been meeting with John and Tom and Finney and Barry, and they were a part of a cohort that is for a group of people that we would call permission givers. And we'll talk about what that means in a few minutes. But they also have them for people that they would call pioneers. Those are the ones that are out trying to start these fresh expressions, right? And so if you choose to go forward, this is a phrase that you'll hear, but this image, I think, is so, so important. That this shows there are two different pieces. This blended ecology means there are two parts that matter the same. They have a different influence and they have a different goal, but neither one of them is subsumed to the other. This isn't something where we say, well, we'll let a few people do a couple of things and we'll try to let them be cool and then they can give us something cool for the newsletter and that's all we do. But we also aren't saying the people that go do the cool stuff that looks good in the newsletter, they are the champs, and those that stick around on Sunday are not. No. You need both. You need the inherited church. The inherited church. What this inherited church brings. That does not mean old-fashioned. Because North Sound is not an old-fashioned church. I go to a lot of churches all over the country. I've been to some. This ain't one of them. Okay, but the inherited church means it is the established. It has made it. It was planted. It has become rooted. And now it is doing what you would expect. It is strong. It is tough. It's got a good root system. And if culture just never would have changed, then then what we're doing is fine. But culture has. And so what you need from the inherited is you need these fresh expressions, the deep roots of the inherited and the wild branches of the fresh expressions, where it starts to spread wider and reach people that, again, whether they should or not, aren't going to come. It doesn't even matter what you do. They're simply not coming because of what you are, a church. So we go to them. Now I'll show you this quickly, but we won't spend too much time on it. This is how there at Wildwood United Methodist Church, they kind of charted out everything. And you can see like there are, there's the church building and a lot of things go off of that. You see people's home. Anyway, I wish we had time to go into that. We just can't. All right. What's a fresh expression? Next slide. All right. Next slide, please. What does it look like is going on here? If you had to describe this, how would you describe this?
Useless dock.
A useless dock. Very good. Who said that? There we go. All right. Now, the question is, do you suspect it was always a useless dock?
Well, here the tide comes at tides.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Let's say that that ground looks really dry.
Yeah.
The water has receded. The water has moved. So do you think, the original goal of the dock to get you closer to the water? Now, originally that dock was in it, right? The problem with that dock is it cannot adjust if the water moves. All right? Now let's look at the next. What is that? A floating dock. I've seen so many of these out here. We have them on the other coast as well, I assure you. But my gosh, there's so many of them out here because of this massive tidal shift that you guys have. We don't. I tell you, you guys. And what does this do that the other one doesn't? It floats. What's that? It adapts. It can move, right? Now, what is the benefit of the other one that doesn't have? Exactly. It's solid. You know, if you really get hit by a big storm, which one of those do you want to be standing on? I guess if you're hit by a big storm, you probably don't want to be standing on either one. We put a new front porch on our house. In Blacksburg, Virginia, the last vestige of unregulated authority is the people that manage building codes. And I say that, not bitterly at all, because I love all people, as I should, and hopefully one day will. But we had to put for each of the, and it's not a huge deck, a front porch, but we had 6 footers. Each one of those footers had to have 500 pounds of concrete to meet code. I know. Yeah, you can tell the people that know, and they're like, okay, that's too much. It is. And just the things we had to do. The safest place in Blacksburg in the event of which we had a tornado last week. In the event of a tornado is to get to our front porch and tie yourself to it. Because if that porch comes up, all is lost anyway. And you don't want to be around for that. That's post-apocalyptic world at that point. But no, you see, if all you have are the set-in docks, and again, I want to make sure that we're very careful because this can be dicey ground. When we looked at that first picture of the dock that the water had moved away from, we are drawing a comparison to the inherited church, but we're not saying the inherited church is only that. And when we're talking about the floating dock, we're saying that is similar to the fresh expression, but the fresh expression isn't only that. We're not taking these, we don't want you to take them too far. There is strength in both. If you just have one, you're probably not going to be able to navigate the world as it actually is. Probably not. Next slide, please. What if we are here for such a time as this and recognize the ripeness for spiritual seeking,
recognize or see the mission opportunities everywhere. Again, return to the Acts Church. Well, you guys have seen this slide before. Take risks. Try stuff. Like Michael Beck's wife, she said, what's wrong with throwing a bunch of spaghetti up against the wall and seeing what sticks? Well, for some people, it's like, well, that's just wrong. The problem is you don't know what's going to stick until you do it. The things we did, ridiculous things, but we tried them. And then we started to learn not only what sticks, but what causes something to stick. What causes it to work? What allows it to develop? We started some things and we could never, you'll see that these fresh expressions, they start one way, but then they move through these processes. We had some that could never move. We had one, if we just want to be honest, and I mean, this is being recorded, and so I don't know what I think about that, but one group that didn't go so well was great at reaching people that were really far away from God, but wasn't really good at talking about God much at all. And so I went to one of them just to, hang out, and they were having a party because someone was getting married. And they had just gotten engaged, and they brought out this big cake in the shape of a phallus. You're familiar with a phallus? Yeah. Okay. If you're not, just by the fact that I'm tiptoeing around the word, you probably get a sense of it. And I thought, okay, there's contextual, and then there's a phallus cake, and I feel like there's a sweet spot somewhere in between there. And but those are the things that are going to happen. You're going to have your phallus cake incidents. There's going to be stuff you're going to hear about, and it's ridiculous. And I think as I look back on it, there were things that I saw or that I could have seen that would have helped us to kind of move in a better direction. I think I missed it. I had to learn. You're going to have to learn, and there's going to be some crazy stuff, and some stuff is going to fail. All right, so could you skip the next slide, please? And let's go to this. Now, what I want to do is I want to look at a couple of models of church real quick. All right, the first one, this is not a model of church. This is just the reality. Like, if any of you know the bridge diagram, this is not the bridge. We're not doing that. There's no hellfire. Okay, so this is just a realization. The church is over here, the people are over here, and there seems to be a break between them, right? So here are a couple of ways that churches navigate this. You can see the first one. The first one is called the Attractional model of church. And what you try to do is that's where you say, let's make this as good as we can and really do things that will make people want to come over to us. Let's get them into the building because that's where the magic can happen. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but it's a legitimate approach. Let's go to, the next one. The next one is called Engage, where the church sends people and you go out to where they are, but then the goal is you get them back into the church. The third is Incarnational, where you go to the people and the goal isn't to get them necessarily back into the church. You take the church to where they are, and you do it a little differently. The goal of this is not necessarily to get some of those people that you're reaching into Northtown on a Sunday morning, even though I guarantee you if you do this, that will happen. But that's not your goal. It's not a long way around just some church growth model. It's a different way of doing church. Okay. Is everybody understanding this? So, the next slide, they're missional. These churches are missional. In John 20, 21, Jesus says, "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." Right? Just like we talked about on Sunday, he's not looking for the people that are the prepared professional people, the ones that we call pastor before their name, or the one that have a bunch of letters after their name. He was looking at normal people like us, saying, "I am now sending you." So when you're hearing that, the way you need to process that is, I have been sent as well. Not some people in this room, I have. That's not playing fast and loose. That's what Jesus' intent was. Okay, we can skip the next two. sorry, some of these slides are just cheeseball with the graphics, and I just apologize. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's get past that. So I want you to think, what's a need, a neighborhood, or a network that's in your community, that's here in Edmonds or in some of the surrounding areas where you guys live? What is a need in your area? What is a network, a group of people that already exists? What is a neighborhood where you live? I want you to think about that. Think of something. Something where you're interested. Something where you care about the people there. That they matter. Think about them. Because we've been sent to those people. Fresh expressions are missional. But they're also contextual. The next slide. Jesus became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. That's the Message translation. Some of you are more familiar with some of the more traditional translations of that. But what he's saying is that he became flesh and dwelt among us. He came to where we are. So we don't always ask people to come to us before we go to them. We follow a God that came to us. The way that we reflect that is continuing to go to them. Mike Moynihan, in the next slide, says that church no longer has the option, if it ever had, of relating to people as if they were all the same. Contextualizing the church is the attempt to be church in ways that are both faithful to Jesus and appropriate to the people the church serves. There are some groups, and in Washington you'll have these, we have these in Virginia, that people, what they do is they do a great job of serving, but there's no Jesus in it. I mean, they love, the love of Jesus is there, but there's never any discussion of him. There's nothing. And that's not what a fresh expression is. Because we're taking our love and helping people to understand it. But there's some people that what they want to do is they want to talk about Jesus so heavily up front it pushes people away. That's not one either. It's this weird middle spot that we almost never are sure that we're getting exactly right. I still don't always know. In particular conversations, did I handle that? Did I go for it too much? Did I hang back too much? There's I'm a little warm, but I have this tattoo, and I wanted one intentionally that was a little bit cryptic, so that people would have to ask, because people with tattoos ask people with tattoos, and you know what's that about? And so I was at my gym, and there's this guy I've been getting to know, and he's like, so what is this? And the reason I got 3 stripes is there's like 5 or 6 things that it meaningfully stands for. And I can choose which one based on the situation I'm in. And they all are meaningful. I'm not being fake. They all mean stuff. If I'm ever asked the question, what is singularly the only thing that all 3 of those stripes stand for, I'm going to be in trouble. But thank goodness nobody ever asked a question like that. And so I said, well, it's because this is a guy I've been trying to, reach out to a little bit. And I said, for me, it's like the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. And that's just meant so much to me. And he's like, oh, boom. I mean, just went. He would have run, like if he was in a cartoon, his hands would have been in front, the feet would have been. And I was like, oh, did I go too soon? Was that too much? And I still don't know, and I've been doing this a long time. I help people figure out what to do, and in those moments, I'm not always sure. And I think that's the point. What we want in our culture is clarity and certainty and predictability. And Jesus, he knows that. If he wanted the church to be that way, he would have done the church differently. He says, no, I'm not going to give you that, but I'll give you something better. I'm going to be with you in it. That's what I'm going to do. And so I had to just go, all right, God, maybe I messed it up. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. But so that's the way it is. All right? It's contextual, but it's also formational. Go and make disciples. A fresh expression is not just some sort of cool thing where you make people feel like they're in church, but they're not really. It just changes what church looks like. But the intent is to make disciples. We are called to go. Jesus said, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. So now I send you. Not I send the professionals, not I send the seminarians. I send you. Now go and make disciples. His power, we're just willing to reflect. And finally, it's ecclesial. That's just an impressive word for its church. It has elements. As these fresh expressions develop, they will take on more pieces of what we would commonly recognize as church. Now, are they going to have an organ, in a Mexican restaurant? Like, okay, who's going to bring the organ? No, they're probably not. They're probably not going to sing worship, although some fresh expressions they do. But they're going to have more and more pieces of what looks more and more like church as it develops. All right? Part of the reason you don't have all of those pieces is because, one, it's really hard to get an organ into a Mexican restaurant, I would have to believe. But the other reason is because if that's what people begin looking for, and you guys don't have more, I'm not saying that, but you get what I'm saying. If they're looking for that more kind of classic image of what church is, then they have it right here. And they can come to it. And that's what happens. People, like that one young woman that said, I was just done. I had been hurt, and I wasn't going to. There are people that do that. And she said, then I fell in love with Jesus again. And about half the time that I see that, and I've seen that video more times, about half the time that brings tears to my eyes. There are people that would, if you would ask them, they would say, I am finished. And the Spirit looking at them and says, no, I still love you, and there's hope. Will someone go? Will someone do that? Will someone be confused and not be sure what to do and maybe handle the tattoo question wrong? Or maybe it's right and the other person receives it. I don't even know. But will someone do that so that her and other people like her could realize that, no, they've been burned, but they're still loved. So it should take on the look of church. When they arrived, they are called the ecclesia together, ecclesia technically, and related all that God had done with them and how he had opened a door of faith for the Gentiles. They came back and they talked about it. All right, what I want to do, there's a video, and I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is just awesome. Has anybody seen this? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. Almost everybody has. Okay. Less impressive for you then. So I want you to watch this, and I just want, especially, if you watched it before, you do the same thing, but I want you to just watch what this guy does when he's confronted with a situation, and then see what happens. So let's go ahead and play the video. I love that video. So, what did you see? There you go. What did you notice?
He joined what was already happening.
There you go. You notice at the start, it was because they had invited someone else, and there wasn't any room for him anymore. So at first he started with the chair, but he was right beside them. Then he noticed that birds were somewhere else. Very good. What else?
He's open to new experiences.
Yeah, and that's very good. He was open to new experiences. But did you notice he didn't start, in some other country coaching soccer? He started just right by them, then over, and then it just slowly began to expand where he went because he realized he could. That's very good. Gene.
I saw them at first, he was the only one feeding the birds, and then they started feeding the birds because he was feeding the birds.
There you go. Right at the very That's true. That's true.
There was a transformation in him.
Yep.
He let go of the game.
Yep. You notice he walked a little bit better, right?
He took some risks.
He sure did. He sure did.
He left the chair as an opportunity for the other people.
Very good. He left the chair as an opportunity. Now, did you notice when he came back, they were still doing the same thing? Still wearing the same clothes, still doing the same thing. And we understand it's a video. But you get the picture. There is what he just started doing is he just started taking small steps. Now, in the midst of that, there were times I'm sure he was nervous, he was tired, he was afraid, but there were things he experienced because he just kept expanding that he wouldn't have otherwise.
It looked like he was going to get another chair also.
He was going in. He left his chair as you guys, you may want to take it, and a page out of this book, but then he was going to get a new one. Right. That's right. Well, we're going to get into some of the guts of what fresh expressions are. And we need to get into guts. Okay, here we go. So 3 characteristics of fresh expressions. First of all, there's a strong mission focus. A strong mission focus. Okay? There is something that is calling you, that is driving you to do these. Sometimes especially in the West, certainly in America, we can have the belief that the goal of being a Christian is to be a slightly nicer, slightly more honest version of the average person. That's what our goal is. I'm going to be nicer because I'm Christian. That's why some people don't get the, ichthus on the back of their car because they're afraid of how it would when they drive. A slightly nicer, slightly more honest version of the average person. But that's not what we're called to be. We're called to be transformed. In Romans, Paul says that you're to offer yourself as a spiritual sacrifice. He's like, when they're talking about what kind of sacrifices do we offer as you follow you, Jesus says, just climb up on the offering fire yourself. That's what you do. You offer your entire self. Okay? So there's a strong mission focus. We are drawn to something. We believe that the Spirit wants to do something. This isn't just being nice to more people. We have a mission. The second is there's a willingness to imagine church, or I would argue, and this is Al Roxborough this is in a lot of his writing, to reimagine church. To reconsider what church is. The next slide, we have some pictures of what things are, and those things are church. They're people that are kayaking. Can you imagine that would be church?
Yes.
There we go. It asks the question, what is essential? The next slide, please. Thank you. What is essential and what is up for change? What is essential? There's one time, actually, Chris Backert and I, it was back when we were pastoring together, we were on a flight from the West Coast to the East Coast, and it was a red eye, and if you can do that when it's a completely full flight, that's you're just, and being back in coach, of course, economy. And so we were just squashed in and just talking. And so we spent the entire flight talking about what is it that we What can you take away that isn't necessary for church, that when you get to the point that if you take another thing, it no longer is? And when we landed, the woman in front of us said, look, if you guys are going to talk all night on a red eye, can you at least talk about sex or something interesting? So I guess she didn't appreciate our conversation. But the next slide, what of what we call church are we willing to give up to be church? Again, we're not just saying, let's take away everything that's difficult. Jesus said that this is going to be difficult for people. People are going to struggle with it. So we're not saying whatever makes people a little edgy, take that away and that's fresh. No. But we're saying, what of what we call church are we willing to give up to be the church? Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of the Church of England, he said this: if church is what happens when people encounter the risen Jesus, if that's what church is, when people encounter the risen Jesus and commit themselves to sustaining and deepening that encounter, that's discipleship, by the way, with each other, there is plenty of theological room for diversity of rhythm and style. We don't have to do it the way we've always done it for it to be good. And changing it doesn't mean we're just trying to avoid difficult things to make it easier. Sometimes change means we're trying to change. We're realizing the water has moved. Not for everybody, but for a lot. And we're just trying to figure out what we do with the dock. Exactly what you guys are doing by thinking about this stuff before you have to. Third characteristic, so a strong mission focus, a willingness to imagine church, and a commitment to existing and new forms of it. Okay, skip the next slide, please. If all we're doing is what we do now, even if we do it well, who will we miss? All right? Now here's what we're going to do. This next part, this is going to get into a process. Now, what I want to do is, the goal of this is to share that what a process isn't in something like this isn't if you do this step for 3 weeks and then this step for 3 weeks and this step for 4 weeks and this step for 4 weeks, then you get this result. I could tell you that's what it is, but I'd be lying and you would see through it. So we're not offering that. But that doesn't mean it's just totally make it up as you go and figure out everything. There are things that we have found over the years that can help. What I want to do is share, we call them the 5 circles. Okay? Before we get to that, I want you to look at this next. Yeah, we'll go to the next slide. The evolution of music listening. Who among us knows that thing in the top right-hand corner? Who had one of those back in the day? That's right. Oh, yes, the magic of it. Okay, and then we had vinyl. And now among my hipster friends, we have vinyl again. A lot of people's Insta posts are covered with, man, just really listening to this, for the first time. Okay, that's fine. And that's, and people say it sounds richer. I don't know. I don't know music well enough to know. My music tastes are so bad. I like 80s pop cheese. That's what I really like. When bands sold out in the 80s and they just started doing like whatever would sell, that was my sweet spot. My wife and I, a couple years ago, we went to see Air Supply in Atlantic City, which was just a perfect place. And we're trying to make it work. I don't know if we can with kids in college, but we're trying to make it work to where we could go see a Journey in Las Vegas in December. I mean, that's so, you shouldn't listen to anything I ever tell you about music. Right? But so it shifted to, we had vinyl. And then we had cassettes. I know we're going vintage. I can't imagine that the cassette thing is going to come back. Like people are like, yeah, I just love the cassette. No, they don't. Nobody loved cassette. All right? But then we shifted to CDs. Anybody have the CD man? Yep. Yeah, that you could put like 4 batteries in and it would last about 6 or 7 minutes. And then we moved to the Walkman. We shifted into digital music, right? And you know what was said when we shifted into digital music? What people screamed from the mountaintops? This is the end of music. Yeah, that's right. This is the end of music. Because it's not as good, it's not as this. And fewer people are going to listen to music once we make this shift. It's not tactile enough. That's part of what music is. And you know what? We have just as many, based on percentage, we have just as many people that listen to music, if not, that's bumped up a little bit now, as ever before. People are still listening to music. They're just changing how they're doing it. And you can fight the fight to go back to CDs all you want. We're not going back there. You can say, do you remember the joy of going into Blockbuster and finding the movie that was actually there, you know, the VHS, pull that thing out, you know, carry it in both arms. And you could say that's really the best way to do it. We're not going back to that. We're not. Things have changed. Now, if we bring this delicately into how the church functions, let's look at what that could look like. Here are the 5 circles. All right? First is listening. That's prayer. And that's listening to the people that you want to do something around. Loving and serving. That's loving and serving. I feel like we probably handle those words pretty well. Building community, an essential step. Exploring discipleship. And then church takes shape. Now, you're not always going to start on the first circle and go to the end. But there is a place for each of these. If you're doing a fresh expression and you're not thinking about these 5 things, you're missing something. You are. You'll make plenty of mistakes on your own. Don't add to it by skipping one of these, okay? So let's look at these 5 circles. The first is listening. Okay? We can skip the next. Yes, go into the next slide, please. You want to look at what group of people have you identified to pay attention to. And when we say listening, I want you to think about it in 2 ways. One, you're listening to what the Spirit is telling you. Because remember, these things are mission-driven. So what is the Spirit telling you? But then what are the people there saying? So many times we can think in the church, we've got it, we're going to bring it, you just need to use it. And we don't listen to the people that came. There was a church in Blacksburg, Virginia. It's a very attractive place for people to plant churches because of the university. And there was a church plant, and they were good people. But they just came in, they had their model, they were bringing it to us. They blasted everybody with postcards, you know, finally a church that connects with your needs, which I think, gosh, what does that say about all of us that thought we were? I guess we weren't. They wanted to plant their church like 2 weeks after Easter. They had these reasons for it. Well, on that particular year, 2 weeks after Easter, landed on April the 16th. I don't know if that name or that date reminds you. That was the day of the shootings at Virginia Tech. The biggest university killing spree. Sometimes I can talk about it, it's fine, another time, and I never know which it is. 3 people in our church were among those that were killed. Hundreds in our church were one away. Someone in our church was the last person out of a window. The person behind them was killed. Almost anywhere else, you can plant a church on April the 16th. And it's fine. Not at Virginia Tech. Not without naming it. Not without saying it. They were going, but they weren't listening. Had they told anyone from the area, this is when we're going to do it, to a person, they would have said, well, just know. Just remember this. I don't think those people meant any harm. They were not listening. Okay. Let's skip the next 2 slides, please. Let's go to the video. Oh, give me a second to collect myself. This is one, I want you to listen to the woman. You know how Peter in the Bible is kind of the voice of every person that doesn't think before they speak? This is a woman, she's not like that at all, but she's just like, she's so normal. And just listen to her experience and what she tried to do and see if that feels out of reach after listening to her. Go ahead, you can play that video, please.
fresh expression. But it was just real obvious that God had been planting people in a place in my life that would be a very easy and wonderful place to reach out to people. I laugh and say, I go to Kroger more every week than maybe I do church. There are a lot of people here that I know and that I love and build friendships with, and then God kind of opened my eyes that, oh, there's a community here. There are a lot of stores. Izzy's in the jewelry store, and Shannon's in the frame shop. He's framed everything in my house, and I get my shoe sticks right over here. Mark is the dry cleaner, and we've eaten the Subway for years, and then God let me see that there's a community here. They feed each other. They feed each other. Then we realize that these people are very busy, and they are serving me. And it just really was laid on my heart that we can bring Christ here. So many of these people, they're working all the time. I began to do something intentionally for Kroger. After I met and talked with the manager at Kroger, I told her a little bit about what I would like to do. And I wanted to do something that would encourage them, that would build them up. And she was very open to that. And I said, well, how about, we just have lunch brought in. Then I realized that I needed to be praying for what God's plan is for this shopping center. I know a lot of Mount Pisgah lives right around here, or it's right around here, and we shop here. This is a place that all of us are going in and out of. So the help that would be wonderful is come join the community here. Be intentional. It would be great to have someone connecting with each one of these shops. It's not hard. It needs to be a tug from the heart. Somebody that you know here, you enjoy seeing, someone you've been caring about. It's building a community of our church here, the people that work here, the people that shop here, the people that own these stores. Our prayer when I'm walking is that this day, people here will be encouraged, that they'll be, without even knowing it, being drawn to God, drawn to looking at things and people spiritually. And I think that's church.
When Glenn was talking there, you can tell she's just in those first couple of circles. That, she's like, she realized something, she saw it, and she's like, oh, I need to pray. That happens. Like, oh, I noticed something. Okay, God, do you want to do anything here? And then, she's probably at the point of the next circle that we'll get to here in just a minute. But she's in the loving and serving phase, where you just care about it. And you realize we could do something here. It's a mall. It's just, how many strip malls are there like that? It seems like everyone has a frame place, a place to fix your shoes, some grocery store. What do you think it might look like to love and serve with the people group God is putting on your heart for this? What would it look like? For me, talking to people at the gym, I know that it's not a good time to go up and there's always those folks that all they want to do is talk and they don't want to do anything else. But those aren't most people. They want to get their stuff done and get moving. So I know it's not a time to have a 5-minute conversation about things. And so I would have 2 or 3 questions that I would ask. And it would just be, they could get through them in 10 seconds if they want to. And if, they're not interested, it would give me a gauge for did they want to talk. And then if they do, then there are a couple more questions I can ask. And then I just started getting to know people and introducing people to other people. And, oh, you're doing this, and oh, there's that. Or you go up and ask, so why are you doing that thing? Or how do you do that thing? Because that looks really hard. You just kind of start just building, just building those connections, just caring for them. And then you find out. I found out one guy he's like a monster in there. And I would have very, very quick conversations. He's a bodybuilder. And he just came up to me and he's like, I saw you, there's some people there, they call me Rev. That's just their nickname for me. And I was like, you're Rev. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I just got this thing that's going on at work, do you pray for people? And just, that. And then I thought, maybe, this would be great, because then I'll go and I'll find out. And, so I prayed, and then, I went back and talked with him, and like, how did it go? He's like, fine. And then just walked away, and it's like, okay, guess it's not a cool story yet. But, and that's part of what you see. It's like you kind of move forward, and people will move to you, and then there's some pushing back a little bit that they feel. I feel like some people are like, oh my gosh, that got a little close. And so but then they'll come back around. It's like you notice there's this orbit that begins to form. But it's just caring for, loving people and serving them. There was a guy who, his girlfriend was pregnant, and they really don't make very much money. And so we thought, well, let's throw him a shower. And so that's just something. I've never thrown a shower. I'm a dude. I'm not usually invited to showers, and I'm fine with that. But, he could use some stuff. So let's find a way to get him some stuff. And that's how I said, look, we're just trying to get him some stuff. You want to be a part of helping him get some stuff. And, it's doing that. But then the next thing is building community. And that's where what Glenn was talking about in that video, what she was saying is that's, it seems like that's probably where she is. They're serving, they're starting to do a few things. And then now how do you start to bring some of that together? How do you start to bring the people that care for these people to, some sort of community with them? So there's building community. All right? If you can skip the next, skip that one. Oh, there we go. Thank you. There are two missiological reasons that building community is so critical. One, church, when it was the center of the town square, used to occupy a national place of community in the community. In fact, that's one of the designations of a term. You've heard the term, post-Christendom. There's a term Christendom, and that was kind of where the church was kind of at the center. Well, literally, most towns and villages would put the church at the middle, and it'd be used for almost everything, right? Not no mo. When community is tighter, people see the transformation of the gospel more easily. It's easier to see it when you're in close proximity. So you want these things to build community. It's not just doing nice things for a group of people. You want that to begin to build community. All right? Now, this is something that Leslie Newbigin said, and it kind of pushes some people in the wrong way, but I think he's right. It is surely a fact of inexhaustible significance that what our Lord left behind him was not a book. Now, this is Jesus. What Jesus left behind was not a book, nor a creed, nor a system of thought, nor a rule of life, but a visible community. He left people. When he was talking to the disciples, they said, how will they know that we love you? What was his answer to them? Right. Love each other. By this, all men will know that you're my disciples, if you love each other. He committed the entire work of salvation to that community. Now Newbigin, I have read a lot about him. He's kind of, we don't have to go into all that. But he is not, the Bible is God's word. He's not denying any of that. He's not saying more than he's saying here. He's saying that what we have done is we have acted as if what Jesus did is he taught the disciples some propositional truths, and we just need to know them. Our faith has become too cognitive. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be cognitive. It is. It just shouldn't only be that. There should be practices and things that we're doing and ways that we're living because of this. All right, let's go to the next 5 circle. So listening, loving and serving, building community, then exploring discipleship. The next slide, to what degree can our discipleship practices happen closer to people's lives? This next slide is what discipleship can mean for some places. You go to a discipleship class and you graduate from it. And now you know what it takes to be a disciple. That's not a wrong piece of it. You'll see in a second. There's a place for that in some. It's just not all of it. Again, we're not saying don't be cognitive. We're just saying don't only be cognitive. There's room for the next slide, informal discussion. And then you can skip to the circles. Oh, that one. That one. Sorry, that's the one. What we realize when we aren't presenting discipleship as just a set of studies that you learn, again, that's important, that's a part of it. But if we start to see discipleship is done back and forth between us and we're talking and we're interacting, it gets messy. Like the way that we want to picture discipleship is that straight line. We're here, 6 months later, we're here. 6 years later, we're here. The way discipleship actually is much closer to that. You know it from your own life, and I do too. And at any given point on that, you might be at a place where things are going great, or you might be worse off than you were before. But over 6 months, over 6 years, as you continue to engage, you find that you are drawing closer and closer to Jesus. Okay? We need to let discipleship be a little murky so that the Spirit can do what he wants to do. So if we're looking at discipleship, these are 3 components of discipleship. One, the formal learning circle. I think we kind of focus on that pretty well. The non-formal learning, we do that, and I think that's the one we're second best at. But looking at how socialization, how our social lives, our lived life affects the way that we continue to learn how to be closer and closer disciples of Jesus, I think we struggle with that a little bit. All right. Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. So what might be ways that you can imagine exploring discipleship with your people group? What might be aspects of the gospel, the good news, that could resonate with your people group? If you're going to start a fresh expression, then a question that you're going to reflect on. It's not always the very first one, but a question that you're going to need, or that you're going to get to within the first couple weeks of doing it. But a question that's going to become important is, okay, how can I discuss the gospel in this context? How would it make sense? And again, making sense doesn't mean taking off the parts that make people feel wiggly. It doesn't mean like softening it and diluting it to where everybody's cool. Jesus is cool, and he's cool with you, and he's just cool, and it's just great. Cool. No. But what we're trying to do is be contextual. How will I talk about this in a way that they can understand that doesn't change this from what this is? How do I talk about the gospel in a way that doesn't change the gospel, but helps it be understood? If you're going to lead a fresh expression, that's going to be something that you need to think about. Or what you will have is a close-knit group of people that are nice. It won't be the church. It'll be a social club. And I don't mean that. I've led some of those groups that really kind of pushed on that. And what I saw is, I'm not seeing any movement. And it's like, well, okay, how are we moving in the way of understanding what the gospel is trying to do? And then I've done groups, and there's lots of people in our church that are doing these, but I'm just using my mistakes because I've made all of them. I'm not exaggerating. I've made them all. There are times I've gone too quickly into it. Like, okay, well, we didn't go deep enough. The phallus cake incident, I went in the next one like, okay, we're going to know about Jesus right now. And what I did is I just tried to shove it down everybody's throat. And I can't do that either. Crap. And so what I learned from there is, okay, Spirit, you're going to have to walk with me, and you're going to have to talk kind of loudly because I'm a little slow. You have to help me see how do we do this. And I'm going to have to be okay with the fact that one group and another group, it's not going to be the same. But our goals, we're always trying to get there. And along the way, there were a lot of people that were saying, see, look what they did there. That proves this doesn't work. Like, no, what that proves is we still have more learning to do. But this thing can work. Now it does, and people think, if you hang in there, people think you're brilliant, and you're really not, because it's really not that complicated. What would be ways to authentically engage discipleship from the early stages of your community? In the church that meets in the Mexican restaurant, the church that meets in the tattoo parlor. There's a lot of CrossFit gyms that are starting this. Because CrossFit, one of the things that they're good at, whether you like CrossFit or not, I used to do it, but I'm sure you can tell because I'm so fit. But, you know, they do community extremely well. One of the things that happens and this is not true across all of them, but it tends to be true in a lot of them, they build very close community and people have a lot of affairs. Because they have community that doesn't have the Spirit involved. Now, again, that doesn't mean that if you're going to a CrossFit gym, that's true of yours. It doesn't mean that. I'm saying that when you look at the statistics, those are two things. But they do community. They build a tight sense of community. So then what we would do is say, okay, so then how do we, for us, I was doing it with some guys at the gym. We were just meeting before it opened. And, you know, so let's early on, discipleship for that was just, let's talk about a couple of things that we're worried about, and we want to just ask God to help us. And even if you don't believe that it's doing anything more than talking to the air, I would say that practice can actually be helpful. Let's try to give him room. So just say something that you need some help with and ask him for help. And it was like the most awkward thing. I need help with... They don't all talk like that, but that's just how I'm doing it right now. And, you know, I need help with this. And it's some deep things. And one guy was like, yeah, my squats are not really increasing, and I really like some help. I'm like, okay, Lord, help him with his squat. You know, and and it was just this whole mix of things. And I would think, oh, my gosh. And then when they would leave, I would like, okay, God, please, just one person. Just give them something that we can see. And they would be like, you know, the guy, like, my squats really opened up, man. Like, praise God. You know, and like, okay, God, I'll take that. That's a win. You know, and then this other guy, there was a problem at work. And so he was like, you know, and then there was a win. And it was just like little things like that. Just that was early discipleship. Let's just come early so we can say these things that I believe are actually going to the ear of God. And you're wondering if you're just talking into the air. But they don't take long. We're not doing it. And we would tell people, if any Christians came, I said, if you ever once pray for 5 minutes, you don't get to pray for 3 weeks. If you ever say phrases like, thank you for washing us in the blood of the Lamb, you don't ever get to pray again. That's it. You're off. No more prayer for you. I was the prayer Nazi, if any of you have seen Seinfeld. And, you know, it was like, look, we're not going to do that. We've got to change the way we do things. And so I would try to help the people that were coming to understand. And then you know, I tell people, if you don't want to, then you don't have to. But if you would go a month and you would never say anything, I would talk to you and say, why don't you just give it a try? We're not putting pressure on everybody, but we're also just watching where everyone is. That's early discipleship. That doesn't have anything in it that would look good in a church newsletter. This guy prayed that his weight in squats would go up. Nobody's impressed by that. That started discipleship. Okay. There's a church, the next slide, they call themselves Not Church. It's a church, and they love Jesus. It's in a CrossFit gym. And so people, the reason they call themselves Not Church is not because they're anti-church. They're like, you know, so people would say, well, what is that you go to? They're like, well, it's not church. It just works. It works in their context. And, you know, it's like they just celebrate things. They don't do things before the different workouts. If you go to CrossFit, they're like really tight, scheduled kind of things. But they do things outside of it. They celebrate birthdays, and they celebrate anniversaries, and they walk with people through divorces, and they walk with people through the good and the tough things of parenting. They just throw a lot of parties, and they say, no, we're not church. But that's what we are. It works for them. There are going to be examples that you'll hear or that you'll come across that people will suggest that you would never do. Some of those because probably nobody should ever do them. But a lot of times it's just, well, no, that's just not the way that you're being directed and led. Okay, the last circle. The church takes shape. So it starts with listening and loving and serving. Then you're beginning to build community. So it's not just you siloed with all these people. You start to bring them together. You start to explore discipleship, even if it's praying that some guy's squat weight would go up a little bit. But then the church begins to take shape. It begins to start, you start seeing more pieces. You start seeing, well, we can break bread. We can have the Lord's Supper together. We can spend some time praying for each other. You know, a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll do like a 5 or 10 minute kind of devotional thing from the Bible, just to kind of let people know. So many people don't have any idea what the Bible says. They're just pretty sure it's wrong. I was doing one, and we were talking about in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. Right? One guy raised his hand, and he's like, do we all have to do that? I was like, well, I mean, it seems, yeah, that seems like the thing. He's like, I don't know, because that seems kind of gay. That's what he said. And the point isn't that that's a funny gay joke. The point is that he was reading that completely without any context at all. And he thought Jesus was saying, I'm going to make you fish for dudes. And there's a context that he was reading that into. That was the point. He had no awareness. Those are the people that are there. And they're willing to talk about this, and they're willing to do things because they're interested in the things that you're interested in. And so it's built around an affinity in a lot of cases, or they care about the thing that you care about, or they live near you and they have relationship. They're willing to do this. They're willing to take these steps, but these steps sometimes have to be so small. It's like, no. What he's doing is he's a fisherman, and he's saying, okay, the work that you put into fishing for your livelihood, I want you to see people. I want you to see that there's value in them. These are the people that are there. He wasn't making any kind of anything. He just had zero context. More and more people that we're reaching out to that are a part of these fresh expressions, they have never opened a Bible in their lifetime. Ever. Have no idea what it means. It's a big book to start, and usually people start at the front, and oh man, that can be tough. That can be tough. Man, even if you make it through Genesis and Exodus, you get into Leviticus. Come on, I know some of you have lost heart in the middle of Leviticus. All right, but what it begins is it begins to start taking on pieces of church. Again, not always the way that we picture it, but it begins taking on pieces. And so there are enduring marks of the church that you'll see in the next slide. Oh, it's a little hard to see. Sorry on that one. But there are 4 different things that a fresh expression should start to do. It should have an upward component. We are here to worship God, even if we're doing it in a slightly different way. There should be an inward component. We are caring for each other. Does this sound like what church is? There should be an outward component where it's an open, and we're inviting people into it. It's not closed off. And then there's a part of component. It should see itself as a part of something bigger. And this is the point where the inherited and established and the fresh expression really intersect. So we're a part of this other thing. We're a part of this church. It'll be talked about in the fresh expression, even if some of the people in there never come. It'll be talked about. They'll know they're a part, and then some of them will come. So the goal is not that you do all this and then eventually they just come on Sunday. But some of them will. The goal, though, it doesn't mean, though, there's no goal. You just do whatever you want to do, and it's just so loosey-goosey. It's all success. No. You should be able to see that there is movement through these steps. And at different times, you're going to run into different difficulties. Each group is going to usually have one circle. When they try to bring on the next one, it's especially difficult. For some, it's building community. For others, it's like getting discipleship to feel like it's not just you saying, so what about? For others, it's, bringing on these components of the church taking shape. Every group is usually going to have one. When I coach people, without exception, there's usually one. And in some cases, it's because, we could have probably done it better earlier. Doesn't matter. It's where we are now, and we can learn moving forward. But sometimes it's just the people. It's just difficult. But the goal is you're trying to move through a process. Does this make sense? Okay. So the question would be, how might you imagine worship that would make sense with the people group that you've been considering today? And we don't have time to give you time to do that because I want to make sure there's time for questions. Okay, the next slide. So this is kind of you're going through all of these, and again, it's not as straightforward as these circles. Again, sometimes you'll move forward on one. It's not like you have to build community fully before you establish discipleship. It isn't that. It's that it's hard to establish consistent discipleship before you build community, right? So these are kind of stepping stones as you go. All the way through, you're underpinning it with prayer, ongoing listening, relationships with the wider church. The next slide. Then for some people, you get back there and you do it again. Some of you are just going to keep starting new ones. You get people that kind of handle the one you're doing, and you start other people, you stay right with the one you're doing. And I'm not sure if this slide came through. Okay, good, it did. So now this is kind of what the blended ecology looks like. And I want to, in particular, draw your attention to the part in between the dotted lines. So the church taking shape. Then the above circle, the inherited congregation. So you'll be a bridge, these fresh expressions will be a bridge back into the inherited church. Because some people will be like, you know what, I love all this. I'm looking for something that's a little bit more. And the fresh expression cannot be all those things. So it's like, well, yeah, here, this is where we do it. This is the thing. And so it can do that. The other, on the bottom circle there, what you'll find is you'll find other people that are willing to start other ones. And so it can be the mission edge kind of going out. There will be people that will not want anything to do with these from the inherited church when they start, but as they see it, they might feel, oh, maybe I could. There'll be some people that will try this and be like, well, I don't think that's for me. And then people will kind of get established where they are. The point is that it's just, once you get it going, it starts moving. And you don't start where Wildwood Church was or our church NLCF is. You don't start there. You start with a couple. We started with a few. Most of them failed. We thought, okay, we can learn something. We had a group that was built around hiking, and we didn't take into account on the East Coast, we get a lot of rain. I'm sure you would probably have something. And then it starts getting cold and sleet. And how do you not? And I was in charge of this one. How do we not plan something that's built exclusively around being outdoors when you can't consistently be outdoors? And we had other more complicated things that we overlooked. But that's just what happens. The point is that it's not just this to this to this to this. The point is, though, that you want to see movement as you go through. The goal is not that this is just a big, long run to get everybody to come back here. But some of them will. The goal is to think, how can we think differently about reaching the people out there? And then this continues doing what it's doing, and it's doing well. The reason we have these is not because what North Sound is doing isn't good. It is a strong dock, and a lot of people will attach up to it. A whole lot of people, the ones that already have, and a whole lot more. We're just acknowledging that, especially in some generations, the water is moved. And we got to figure out a different way to get to them. One that doesn't blow up this. I've seen so many models, and one of them is, well, it's not working, so just blow up the whole thing and restart it. No. We've already talked about what some people say. No, we just kind of hunker down and just believe that people are going to change back to the way that we think they ought to be. Nope. Let's honor what's good, and let's stretch. Let's just see if God is willing to take what is not enough and make it enough again. My gut tells me he's not done with that. My gut tells me that all the cool stories haven't been told yet. He's looking for people that would be willing to step out like that dude with his chair, and be here, and then he's coaching soccer somewhere. Standing with some naked dude. I don't know what that's about, but he was. All right, questions. Are there any questions about anything that I've said? I'm sure they're not, because it's so clear. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm thinking about this, and I can appreciate the idea. So when we're out there doing a fresh expression, we're going to run into some tough customers, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the answers.
Yep.
I'm not trained, I don't know.
Yep.
So I would be a little anxious about that.
Yep.
Can you repeat his question?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So the question was, if you're out there doing these fresh expressions, you're going to run into some folks that have some tough questions that you don't have the answers for. Not even you do not have the answers for the questions that they're asking. And that's a concern, right? Is that a good?
Yeah.
And I would say, yep. And that just doesn't stop us. Like when Jesus sent out the disciples, and I'm not saying that dismissively, because that's a very important question. When Jesus sent the disciples out, he did not prepare them fully. He just gave them the Spirit, just like we have. I think I shared on Sunday that even one time they went out and they were trying to cast out a demon and it beat them up. And he came back and they're like, oh, here's how you handle that one. He did not, I don't think he is, there's this kind of cliche and it's a little cheese ball, but I think there's truth. He doesn't, he doesn't call the prepared, he prepares the called. So what he would do is, on one hand, he would say, don't allow that fear to keep you from going anyway. But then, I think what we had to do is we had to build structures in the inherited church that could get people answers to those questions. So we started having just kind of open Q&A nights. Because people were running into people that are like, well, before I started following Jesus, before my junior year at Tech, I was like, well, the Bible, you can read whatever you want. It's like a book of fables. So fine. I don't read Aesop's fables and think, okay, thank you, okay. There's it's a story about a crow and a piece of cheese and this, and it's like, whatever. There's probably a good life lesson, but it's not true. We ran into a whole bunch of things like that. Or we also started running into, well, what about all of the terrible things the church has done? And so what we had to build in, as we ran into that, we didn't do it before because we didn't know everything that was we had things we would imagine would be difficult. But as we did it, we started building in structures within the inherited church that then we could start drawing from. And so we started having book suggestions or book discussion groups, or we started having those Q&A nights. We started having people that we could go to and say, this person's really concerned. I wrote a book about should we fire God, about 10 years ago. And I would agree we should not. But it gets into the problem of evil. And so if there were problem of evil questions, then someone would, hey, Jim, can you come and just... So we built that structure as we went, but we couldn't build it before we went. Does that answer that question, or does that...
You also mentioned the Spirit, which I was kind of leaving out, and I think that's...
Yeah.
important. Thank you.
Right, well, it's hard, especially in our culture. Both we ourselves, but the people that we're talking to, they want a certain level of intellectual competency before, and what we're saying is, no, we're just going to love you, and then as we run into things, we're going to figure it out. And that feels like a flippant answer, but that's genuinely, whenever we've tried to get in front of what the need is, we've been at least slightly wrong about what the need is. So we've learned, we follow. Hopefully we don't get people beat up and then, oh, well, here's how you do this one. But we would go back and say Jesus did, so at least we haven't, That's a great question. Yes?
When you're starting the process of seeking and then establishing a community,
yeah.
Is there explanation of kind of generally what you're trying to be?
Oh, that's good.
Or do you just how do you invite people to something?
Right.
Or do you just invite them and have the something emerge over time?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is, when you're starting to build community, how clear are you about what you're trying to build? Or do you, there's a phrase called the Jesus juke. Have you heard that? It's like something's going and then because of Jesus, and it's like this, kind of thing. Is it a Jesus juke? And I would say that it really depends. Like there are some that you start and it's a little bit more overt. We just want to get together. We're a bunch of people that follow Jesus, but we're friends with people that don't, and we think, we just would like to live kind of life together and do a couple things. It's not going to be a real heavy church, but, do a couple things. In some groups, that's a good thing to do. It allows for a little bit more clarity. For others, I would say, and we haven't built that in early on. We just say, we want to get together. We feel like we would like to have community, and we like each other. We like doing the same things. What if we just kind of hang out and do? Like with guys, what I found, if it's a primarily guy group and you really push the community, that doesn't work really well. I just want to be in a community with you. Among guys, that's a weird thing to say. It shouldn't be, but it is. And so it's like, well, we were just going to hang out. For some, we don't even tell them we're going to consistently do it. We're just hanging out. You want to come? And then like, oh, I can't. Oh, it's fine. We do it usually each week. Of course we do it each week. But yeah, we're kind of doing it each week. And so it really depends on the group. I would say that you want to build in, if you're not saying what it is, you do want to build in some of those early pieces. So if you're not saying, okay, let's get together for this. We get guys together to do intramural sports in Blacksburg a lot. And so we would say, you want to just kind of join. There are a group of us from our church are doing this. And one thing we do is we just get together and we just pray right before. Pray that nobody breaks an ankle or nobody hauls off and hits somebody or, swears blue thunder, which of course in men's sports, that's never an issue because we're also genteel. And that's so we haven't said, okay, this is a group, we're starting to do this. It's just, we're just a group that we do this sport, but we just get to, and we just pray. Are you cool with that? You can join it if you want, or you just listen, it's fine. And so we're building in something, but we're not saying, okay, what our end goal is that it would be this, and this. So we're leaving breadcrumbs, and then we slowly move through the progression. Does that make sense? So now the less clear you are, the more you can lose people as you go through the steps. Because some people are like, okay, this is getting to whatever. I'm just out. And regardless how well you do it, you're going to have some of those folks. The contra of that is, if you're really clear, depending on the group you're doing, it could be a really big wall. And people just I don't want church in any circumstances. And so it's like, you just have to weigh that, and you have to take that before the Lord. I think I've probably gotten it right about as many times as I've gotten it wrong. But you can always adjust and move. If you feel like, I feel like, oh, we kind of went heavy and people really, really took a big, and not just a feeling, convicted step back, but I think I really shoved. Then the next couple, okay, we're really going to back that off. Or, I feel like we're not really talking about anything of substance. So I'm going to really try to move it. I'm going to take it like where the next step would be, I'm going to try to bump it another. And it just, the only thing I can say is it's a bit like if you're a parent knowing how to handle if your kid wigs out. If, hypothetically, let's just say they do, because we know kids don't ever do that, go crazy. Like sometimes you gotta, okay, we need to lock that down. And other times, what you really need to do is you need to just step into it. When my daughter was going through puberty, I had no idea what to do with that. We had 2 boys. Puberty was different for them. They just wanted to punch everything, and so we'd have them run, and it worked fine. Our daughter had emotions, and those were confusing. And so she would do something. One time, she just growled at me. Growled. And our daughter's a low-key, she growled. And I don't know how many times I would just look at my wife. I was like, what do I do? And then she would go like this. That meant hug, or it was like she had to guide me. And so there's a little bit of touch to it, like parenting, like a lot of things. There's a little bit of touch to it. So it's hard to say definitively. But what I think you want to be doing is looking at how are people responding, where am I trying to go, what would make the most sense, where are the best places to put the challenge. What this does is it pulls some of the things that place challenge where it doesn't really have to be. I can follow God even if I don't like singing this kind of music. I can follow God even if I don't come into here on Sunday. So you're pulling some of those things away so that you can focus on where does the challenge need to be. Where do I feel like I'm getting a sense, okay, we're going to push. And if you do this over time, you develop a little bit of a sense. Just like when you're a parent, over time you get a little bit of a sense. Okay, here's the right response. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't, but that's how you. It's a long way of saying But it's not random, but it's not formulaic. Yeah. Yes.
So if this is helpful at all,
Mm-hmm.
You're all leaders. You already lead. You already draw a group of people. So my example is, and this is how God has worked in my life. I am a chaplain.
Mm.
I didn't choose that.
Yeah.
God brought a situation into my life that I served. And he said, Debbie, this is work I want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
So as you share, not to listen to the mind, but just, once I get a call, I just pray to the Holy Spirit. I get out of my head, and I just say, use me as I am to be used in this moment. There's times that I feel that I've failed. However, I don't know.
Yep.
But later on, I hear back how much just being there, and I didn't do anything. I was just there to be present on the worst day of somebody's life. Right? So I get that fresh expressions may not just be about being a chaplain, but whatever you already normally do in your life, you're a leader. And trust that. Trust how God will lead you in all of what you do in this life. It's like being a parent. And that is what I hear you share, Jim. It's like when you were in the gym or wherever you are. It just happens.
Yeah.
And when we allow it and not have to think about it, God will lead us.
Yeah.
So
That's a great word. That's a great and a necessary word for a lot of us in the West that do want to kind of have a flow chart. I think in terms of flow charts. That's the way I think. And I've had to, what this has done with me is it shows me God is using those things he's already built, which you just referenced, and he's using this to help shape me into a closer disciple of him. Because I'm in these situations like, I don't know. God, all I can lean on is this, that you take what is not enough and you make it enough. And I'm asking you to put your might behind that now, because I am not enough. I get it wrong, I get angry, I get frustrated, I compare. I do every one of the sins you're not supposed to do when it comes to leading groups. And yet he uses people like me. And I'm one of the people that has a lot of letters behind my name. I'm a consultant. I'm flawed. And I'm just trying to do it. And sometimes I think I hear and I'm wrong, and sometimes I don't think I hear but actually have, and sometimes I realize it. And yet the beauty is, if God was going to do the church the way that we feel like we need to be for him to do the church through us, the church would have never made it out of the first century. One of the greatest miracles in church history is that it made it out of the first century. It's still going. We really can't ultimately kill it. So I'm going to lean into that, and I'm going to try to put my chips there. And then when I screw up, I'm just going Okay? Not everybody is. You might be. The second one, and this is the one that gets such a cultural short treatment, my gosh, is a supporter. A supporter. Man, we don't think of supporters as being as useful as pioneers. Let me tell you about one of the groups we had. We had a group that was our very first intramural group. The most successful type of group we've done at our church, hands down. And the first one was a massive failure. If you're a supporter, you don't necessarily want to be the one out front starting it, but what you want to do is help make it happen. You might actually want to be in one of these fresh expressions, or you might want to stay in the inherited church, but you are going to be someone that's always going to be listening and thinking, how can we help these things be more effective, work better, work smoother? What do they need? If you think, what do these things need to do well? You very well might be a supporter. And I am telling you, I was a pioneer, and then I kind of shifted into the third category that I'll go into in a minute. I am just so bad at some of the things you need to do in order for these things to work. I'm great at imagining that it could, and I'm terrible. In Israelite culture, The pioneer would be, there was a shepherd that would decide the path that the flock was going to take to go from here to here. Like, we'll go this far in a day. In order to get there on time, we need to cover this much ground, and we need to get to these places along the way. But then what they had is they had another kind of shepherd that was not in charge of figuring out where they needed to get to by the end of the day. They were in charge of figuring out, could they actually make it? Could they actually do it? Well, you want to get this far and you want to kind of go this way. We can't go this way, because if we do, at night, the flock is going to be unprotected and we're going to lose. Or there's no water the way you want to go. What they're doing is they're seeing how everything works. So you might be a supporter and you feel drawn to be in one of these, or you might be a supporter that wants to stay in the inherited and look to see how you can help them or just defend them when inevitably the phallic cake happens, or some version of that. That's a supporter. You typically have more supporters than pioneers, and that's not because pioneers are more rare people. It's because you need more supporters to actually make it happen. The last, no. Okay. The last, and it's totally fine. The last is a permission giver. You're a permission giver, and this is where I kind of shifted into. If the reality of this working, if you're on board with it, you're going to make it easier for everybody if people knew it. You might be functionally a permission giver. One of the pastors or staff, they would have a role. They say, we're not doing any of this, then chances are it's not going to flourish at Northside, right? But that's only a very small percentage of the church. You know those people that if they're for something, a lot of people are for it. If they ain't for something, a whole lot of people ain't. If you're a permission giver, your role is to help to allow that, the enthusiasm, the belief in this to be directed behind the people that are trying to do it, both when it starts, when they're running into problems, and when it's going well. You're leveraging your position to help something happen. How many times in the Gospels, and especially in Acts, was there a key person? When Paul first met Phoebe at the start of Acts, right before that, he had a dream. There was a man from Macedonia that was calling him. He was trying to go one place, and the Spirit kept him from going another, and the Spirit kept him from going in another. He had a dream. There was a man from Macedonia calling him, and then they went to where Phoebe was. That was generally the area of Macedonia. I believe that what Paul was doing is he was looking for that dude. He was looking for the guy that had come to him in a dream. And what God was doing is directing him to that woman by the river. This is who you need for this thing to go well at the next step. That's part of the reason that Phoebe had to convince him. No, come back with me. I mean, there's other reasons too, but the reality is it was like how many times in Acts was there a key person? How many times in the history of North Sound has there been a key person or something broke loose at the right time? If you are a permission giver, you need to think about how you leverage that. Our culture would say if you're in that role, you use it for yourself to keep things the way that you want them. That is not the way it is in the kingdom. 1 Peter says, don't use authority the way the Gentiles, that everybody else does. Don't do that. Go back to Philippians 2. Your attitude should be the same that Christ Jesus had. If you have that influence, use it. But use it towards what you believe the kingdom is trying to do. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to be equally excited about these. I'm not saying that everybody has to be equally convinced. And I'm definitely not saying if you do it, it's going to be easy. But what I can tell you is this. Lots of normal people in normal churches that are unprepared and then do a lot of things wrong. Trust that the Spirit will take what is not enough and make it enough. Lo and behold, you find out He's still doing that. The Spirit wants to move. The water has shifted. The dock needs to extend. The part that goes out needs to be anchored to something that can handle a storm. But the thing that's anchored that can handle the storm needs to trust that the other dock, moving and adjusting, will work too. The big sin of a fresh expression, if you're a part of that, of the wild branches, is that you look at the established church and you say, that thing is old-fashioned. It's just out of date. North Sound is not out of date. You're not approaching this because you're out of date. You're not. You're going to reach a lot of people. The sin of the wild branches is they don't appreciate the trunk. Well, you get banged up enough, you'll start appreciating it, I guarantee you. So you start with it or you finish with it. But there's in Proverbs it says, 1,000 or 100 lashes to the back of a fool is like reproof to the wise. Either way, you're going to figure it out. It's just how much pain are you willing to endure to get there. But the sin of the established church is they don't like the wild branches being quite as wild as they are. They're not willing to forgive when there's a mistake. You need to do it like we do it. You can just do it over there. No. When both are willing to give room, you see something really cool. And it's not easy. It's not, you get there at a point and you stay there. It always has to be cultivated. That's why each of these gifts matters. Each one does. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to think, and I want you to think, what of those three am I? Am I a pioneer? Am I excited about maybe trying one of these out? Am I a supporter? I want to be involved either in one or from the established church. And I want to help those things succeed. Or am I a permission giver? That I realize that if I'm in favor of this, it's going to go easier. Which are you? So the question is, what are 2 action items to which you can commit to foster fresh expressions in your context? Based on what you are, what is 1 or 2 things you could do? You don't know all the ins and outs of this. And you're not supposed to. It's just a vision day. It's just a start. This is half of a normal first step. So you're not supposed to know all of it by the end of it. We've gone over a wide range of things. But based on what you know, what do you think you could do? If you're a pioneer, you might think, I need to start thinking about how this might work, or I need to talk with someone from the church to see how could this work. If you're a supporter, it might be, well, I need to do the same thing. I need to know somebody knows that that's what I am, and I want to get in there. Or I need to realize that if I'm a supporter, I'm going to have to be willing when other people are downing something, I'm going to have to stand up and support. I'm a permission giver. I need to think about how could I help with that? What are a couple things that you do? Now, here's what I'm going to pray for us. Then we'll have some time for questions. And then what I'm going to suggest, and I'll leave this to Barry and Finney, and y'all kind of do with this as you please. If you would like, because we've had to kind of go through things so quickly, and I just know the way that I am. Sometimes I'm like, when I'm taking it in, it's kind of hard to come up with all the questions. I'd be willing to do a Zoom call in a couple weeks, and where we could just throw questions around. If you would like to be a part of that, let them know, and then we can schedule something like that, and I'd be happy to do that if that's useful. I don't want to assume. It's one of those things I don't feel put upon if you ask, and I'm not offended if you don't. Okay, let me pray. And I want to pray this benediction over you. And it's a benediction that it's quite old, and it's a little bit of a different kind of benediction. Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God the Father be with you. And may the Holy Spirit come upon you and disturb you and trouble you, and set before you an impossible task and dare you to do it. Until in your desperation you fall on your knees and remain there until he fills you with his power, which alone will enable you to do it. And then, but only then, may the Lord grant you his peace. Amen.
Thanks so much, Jim, for that wonderful introduction to Fresh Expressions. And I know Jim mentioned may have a few minutes for some questions. If you would like to come up and check with him, you're welcome to do so. And it was a joy as your pastor to be able to sit back and write your names down. So you didn't sign in, but I signed you in today. So what we'll do is get an email off. And I mentioned to you, whether you're here in the room or online or watching this later, there was no commitment to coming this morning. So, in fact, while I have your names and we want to be in contact with you, you haven't signed your life away. But if you're interested in this and are interested in being a pioneer or a supporter or in the role of permission giver, please talk to us. Again, we'll get to you, but let us know your level of interest, and we'll begin the journey together. As you saw, it's a journey. And you won't be alone. We'll be taking this journey together. So we invite you into that with us. And again, if you wanted to rehearse what you saw today, it will be available on the church's website, so you can go back and pick it up. Folks who were watching live, we had some kind of a power outage here at church, so it wasn't something that Jim said. Although I've never used the word phallus in a sermon myself.
If God was going to do that, it would have been after the first phallus kid. I think that's right.
So anyway, it's so good to have you here and to see you. Thank you for joining us today. And Jim, thank you again for being with us. Let's thank Jim together. Pastor Allen, do we need to do anything else? You need help putting chairs away or anything? No, nothing? Okay. So anyway, thank you all for being here. God bless you.